Mira placed the last plate on the table, her hands moving with quiet precision. She straightened the fork beside John's napkin, adjusted the edge of the tablecloth, and glanced briefly at the clock on the wall. The soft hum of the TV echoed from the living room, where John sat slouched on the couch, eyes fixed on the screen, fingers occasionally digging into a bowl of salted peanuts. His attention was elsewhere, as always, and his silence had long stopped bothering her. She walked into the kitchen, filled 2 cups of tea, hers slightly lighter, his dark and strong, and returned with both cups balanced on a tray. The smell of cardamom wafted gently as she placed the tray down. Mira picked up John's cup and held it out to him, her voice low, steady, almost rehearsed. "Your tea," she said softly. He didn't look at her. He mumbled, eyes still locked on the screen as he reached out and took the cup from her hand without a glance. Mira watched him for a second longer than usual, then turned and walked back to the dining table, sitting in her usual chair, her own tea untouched. She folded her hands in her lap, her gaze drifting toward the cup in front of her. It sat steaming gently, the liquid swirling inside. The cup had a faint chip on the handle, one she'd meant to fix or toss out, but never did. Like many things. In this house, it remained slightly broken but functional. Dinner was quiet. John said nothing between bites, and Mira didn't speak unless necessary. She passed the bread, topped off his water, and wiped down the edge of the table after he spilled some curry. When he was done, he stood, belched under his breath, and walked off without a word. Mira began gathering the plates, calmly. She placed each utensil carefully into the sink, rinsed them off, then wiped the counters down until they were spotless. Her movements were methodical, not rushed, as though time meant little once dinner was done. When everything was back in its place, she dried her hands and made her way to the bedroom. The hallway light buzzed faintly above her. In the bedroom, she stood before the dresser mirror, removing her earrings one by one. She opened the drawer, took out a small orange pill bottle, and stared at it. There was a soft, almost unreadable smile on her lips, more like an old habit than an expression of emotion. She opened the bottle, took 1 tablet, and walked toward the nightstand where a glass of water waited. She paused, pill in one hand, glass in the other. Her reflection in the mirror was still unreadable. Then, with practiced grace, she tilted the glass just enough to let the pill touch her lips. But instead of swallowing, she let it slip down into her palm as she pretended to drink. She set the empty glass down and slipped the pill into a tissue, folding it tightly and tucking it into the drawer with a slow, deliberate motion. She climbed into bed, turned off the lamp, and lay still for several long seconds before quietly slipping out from under the blanket again. Barefoot and silent, she moved through the house in the dark, guided only by the thin glow of the refrigerator, light leaking down the hallway. She reached the kitchen and opened a lower cabinet with a key she kept hidden behind the curtain rod. Inside, tucked behind old recipe books and unused spice jars, was a small locked drawer. She inserted the second key and turned it gently. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside were 2 pill bottles, identical in shape, label, and color. She reached for one, uncapped it, and poured 2 pills into her hand, comparing them in the dim light. A slight difference in texture was visible, if one knew what to look for, and she knew. She'd spent weeks studying it. She placed the original bottle back in the drawer and held the second one for a moment longer, then set it where the first had been. She locked the drawer, returned the key, and stood still, listening. John was snoring faintly in the other room. Mira looked around the quiet kitchen. Her eyes lingered on the tiles, the fridge magnets, the barely there hum of the overhead light. Nothing about this space had changed in years, and yet tonight everything had. She breathed in deeply, not as a relief, but as a reset. There was no room for nerves, only clarity. She walked back to the bedroom, unwrapped the hidden pill, and, dropped it gently into a small glass jar hidden behind her books. It joined a dozen others. She screwed the lid tight, set it aside, and finally got back into bed, pulling the blanket to her chin. Beside her, John stirred briefly, but didn't. "Wake." Mira's eyes stayed open in the dark, blinking slowly as she listened to his breathing even out again. She knew the sounds well, every rhythm, every cough, every shift. And now, she was learning something new. How he moved when the pills worked, and how he moved when they didn't. Her fingers brushed the edge of the nightstand as she reached under the bed and pulled out a small notebook. She flipped to a marked page and noted the date, the exact time, and what she'd done. Her handwriting was neat, precise. She closed the notebook, slid it back under, and turned to lie on her side, facing away from him. The night passed without another word between them. Just the sound of one woman's quiet preparation. The first time Mira felt the haze settle behind her eyes. It was subtle enough to ignore. She had blamed the long day, the lack of sleep, the stress of managing a house that felt more like a routine than a life. That evening, she'd sipped her tea slowly while folding laundry, and halfway through the task, she'd found herself blinking more often, her hands slowing, her thoughts drifting into a fog she couldn't name. She brushed it off. Everyone got tired. Nothing unusual, but the next night it happened again, and the next. She started noticing the same heavy feeling, not just in her body but in her memory. Some nights she couldn't remember putting the dishes in the washer. Some nights she didn't recall conversations John insisted they'd had. There were moments where entire stretches of time blurred like smudged ink. Still, Mira told herself, it was exhaustion. Maybe her iron was low. Maybe she wasn't drinking enough water. Maybe she was overthinking. A week later, Jennifer dropped by. The two had been friends since college, though life had taken them in different directions. Jennifer had gone on to become a pharmacist, the practical, sharp type who wore her hair in a tight bun and always noticed the smallest things. Mira served her tea with a cautious smile, the kind she wore with most people now. "Still using the same blend?" Jennifer asked as she sipped. "You used to add cinnamon. I miss that." Mira smiled politely. "John doesn't like it. Says it gives him heartburn." Jennifer raised her eyebrows but didn't comment. Her eyes swept around the room, absorbing everything. Mira always felt like Jennifer could read more than she let on. They sat together in the living room, catching up on family, jobs, old memories. Mira laughed, but even as she spoke, her body felt sluggish. Her fingers felt numb against the cup. Her head felt too heavy for her shoulders. It had happened again. She pressed her fingers to her temple and sighed. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately. I'm just always tired." Jennifer tilted her head, concerned. "Tired how? Like no energy or sleepy tired?" "Sleepy, forgetful too," Mira replied. "I've started forgetting little things. I'm half asleep by 9. That's not normal for me." Jennifer leaned forward. "Are you taking anything? Supplements? Medicine?" Mira hesitated. "Just something John gave me. He said it might help me relax. I've been having trouble sleeping some nights." Jennifer's voice was calm. "Do you have it?" Mira got up and returned a minute later, with the orange pill bottle. She handed it to Jennifer, who examined the label with a slight frown. "This doesn't have your name on it. I think it was from his doctor." "Leftover, maybe," Mira offered. Jennifer turned the bottle in her hands, reading the tiny text. "This isn't a sleeping aid, Mira. This is a sedative. Mild, but it's not something you should be taking casually, and definitely not without a prescription. Do you know how often he gives it to you?" "Just at night. Usually with tea." Jennifer looked up slowly. "You mean he gives you the pill, or—" "He makes the tea for both of us most nights. He says it helps me calm down." Jennifer handed the bottle back. "I don't want to scare you, but this isn't safe. Not the drug, not the way it's being used. You shouldn't be feeling like this. You shouldn't be forgetting things. Mira, this isn't right. Mira smiled, trying to downplay her discomfort. It's probably nothing. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Jennifer didn't argue. She stood, smoothed her scarf, and gave Mira a long hug before leaving. Her last words lingered after she walked out the door. Just be careful, okay? That night, Mira sat at the edge of her bed with the pill in her palm, staring at it. Longer than usual. Her mind played back Jennifer's voice, the seriousness in her tone. She reached for her phone and opened a search engine. It was late, John was already asleep, and the house was still. She typed in the name of the pill and hit enter. The screen flooded with medical articles. Prescribed for severe anxiety, risk of dependency. Causes short-term memory loss with prolonged use. Drowsiness, sedation, impaired cognition. Her pulse quickened as she kept scrolling. She clicked through forums where people talked about the side effects, how some had no idea what they were, taking until they stopped. Some described feeling like they'd lost days, weeks. Others mentioned being manipulated into taking it. Mira's hand went cold. She closed the phone screen, then reopened it. She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't ignore the way the pieces began lining up in her mind. The fog, the forgetfulness, the fatigue, the confusion, and the way John always insisted on making her tea himself, the way he never took any of the pills with her, the way he looked at her when she said she didn't remember something, like he was disappointed or amused. Mira rose slowly from the bed and walked to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, neutral and pale under the dim light. She turned the bottle over in her hand again, this time with intent. A quiet shift had taken place inside her. Doubt had grown into suspicion, and suspicion now edged closer to something sharper. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she waited until John's breathing was deep and rhythmic, then crept into the hallway and retrieved a small notebook from the drawer near the kitchen. She flipped to a blank page, wrote down the pill's name, its effects, the date, and the symptoms she had felt. She noted the dosage, the color, the way the bottle was handed to her without question. Her handwriting was slow, deliberate. At the bottom of the page, she wrote a single sentence: "Find out how long this has been happening." Then she slid the notebook back into its place, quietly returned to bed, and lay beside her husband with eyes wide open in the dark. Her body still felt heavy, but her mind had started to wake. Mira noticed it again. The way John always held the pill bottle just a second longer than necessary before handing her the tablet. He never let her take it herself. If she walked toward the medicine cabinet, he'd casually appear in the kitchen, already holding the orange bottle, saying, "Here, I got it," always with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Once, when she reached for the bottle herself, he gently but firmly pulled it back, chuckling as if she were being silly. "No need, Mira. Let me take care of you. You're always so tired these days." That word again, tired. It had become the excuse for everything. Her silence, her forgetfulness, the hours she couldn't account for. But now, Mira wasn't just listening. She was watching, remembering. She kept the pill between her fingers one evening, pretending to swallow it, only to slip it into the folded napkin on her lap. Later, she wrapped it carefully in a tissue and dropped it into the small glass jar, hidden behind the old spice containers in the kitchen. 3 nights later, there were already 7 pills inside. Each night, she made a small note in her diary. Did not take pill. Stored. Felt alert. No memory loss. John insisted. Again. The notebook, previously filled with recipes and household lists, was now her secret ledger, tucked between the covers of an old cookbook. She never left it in the open. Every observation had its place, every entry timed after John was snoring beside her. Their conversations began to shift too. She started asking him questions with no warning, weaving them into ordinary moments. "Do you remember what we talked about last night?" she asked once as she served him breakfast. He looked up from his plate and blinked, searching. "You said you were too tired to talk, remember?" he answered, cautious. Mira nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She remembered speaking, vaguely, but now she wasn't sure if she had or if he had simply planted the idea later. Another time, while folding laundry, she casually asked, "Did we watch something yesterday evening? I can't remember if it was a movie or a game." John's brow furrowed. "You sat with me through the whole match. How can you not remember? Are you skipping the pills again?" He said it half laughing, but there was an edge behind the words. Mira smiled faintly. "Of course not," she said. "Just a strange haze." He grew more watchful after that. She noticed how he'd stand behind her longer, his eyes following her movements with a quiet intensity. If she reached for the wrong drawer, he'd ask what she needed. If she stayed up past her usual bedtime, he'd nudge her gently toward the room. "Come on, Mira. You know you'll feel terrible in the morning without sleep." His voice was always calm, almost sweet. Almost. But Mira had learned to play the same game. She started preparing his tea along with hers, masking her true intentions, behind a quiet smile. And when he asked about the pill, she took it from him, swallowed visibly, and even made a show of finishing her tea. Meanwhile, her other hand slipped the real pill under her sleeve. She had practiced the sleight of hand in the mirror. Every lie she told was deliberate, measured, every movement carefully timed. One afternoon, while John was out, she used the opportunity to set up the small camera she had ordered online, one designed to look like a plug-in air freshener. She placed it in the kitchen, angled toward the stove and the cabinet where the teacups were kept. It had no blinking lights, no sound, just quiet recording, waiting for moments that she couldn't afford to miss. She tested it 3 times before letting it run overnight. That evening she sat at the table as usual, feeling his eyes on her while she picked at her food. He handed her the pill with the same casual authority. "Take it now. You'll sleep better," he said. She nodded, took the pill, swallowed, except she didn't, and washed it down with the tea. She smiled back at him gently, her fingers curled tightly beneath the table. Later that night, while John slept, Mira slipped into the kitchen, locked the door, and removed the small memory card from the back of the camera. She transferred the footage to her laptop, her heart pounding in her ears as she fast-forwarded through the dull evening scenes. And then she saw it. There he was, standing at the stove, the kettle already steaming. He opened the drawer, took out the pill bottle, and paused. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a second item, something small, wrapped in foil. He crushed the contents between 2 spoons with practiced ease. White powder clung to the metal as he tapped it, carefully into one of the mugs. Not both, just one. Mira paused the footage. She zoomed in. His hand stirred her cup clockwise twice. Then he wiped the spoon with a napkin and placed it in the sink, like he always did. Her fingers shook slightly on the trackpad. She hit play again. He walked to the table with both cups, placed them down, and called for her. "Tea's ready." There it was, clear as daylight. Not suspicion, not imagination. Proof. Mira sat frozen in her chair, the glow of the screen flickering across her face. The room was dead silent, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint rustle of leaves outside the window. She rewound the video and watched it again, slower this time, her breath steadying with each passing second. She didn't flinch, didn't a cry. Her expression stayed calm, calculated. She clicked to save the file in 2 separate folders, one on her laptop and another on a USB drive. Then she labeled the footage, backed it up again, and carefully returned the memory card to the camera. By the time she turned off the lights and walked back to the bedroom, her hands had stopped trembling. She lay beside John in the dark, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His breath was deep and even, oblivious to what had just changed. Mira didn't move. She didn't need to anymore. She already knew exactly what he was doing, and now she had proof. The cafe was nearly empty when Mira arrived, a soft drizzle falling outside the large glass windows. Jennifer sat at the corner table, already nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. Mira slid into the seat across from her, without a word, her eyes tired but focused. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavier than usual. Not tense, just thick with unspoken thoughts. Mira finally reached into her bag and pulled out the USB. She placed it on the table, slid it toward Jennifer. Jennifer stared at it. "What is this?" Mira looked at her, her voice low. "Footage from the kitchen. He's been drugging me." Jennifer blinked slowly, then picked up the USB with trembling fingers. She didn't need to see it to believe her. "How long?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months," Mira said. "I've been pretending to take the pills. I've saved nearly a month's worth." Jennifer sat back in her chair, her jaw tightening. "You can't stay there, Mira. This is serious. You need to leave. Go to the police. You can't live with him another night." Mira looked away, her fingers wrapped around the warm teacup in front of her. "And go where?" she asked, almost too softly to hear. "You know I don't have family. No savings, no job. John made sure I stayed inside that house. I don't even have my own bank account." Jennifer leaned forward. "You don't need money to leave abuse. There are shelters, support centers. I'll help you. We'll figure something out." But Mira didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stared out at the rain, her voice steady, despite everything inside her shaking. "I need to know why, Jennifer. Why would he do this? What's the reason? He could have just asked me to leave or divorced me, but he didn't. He drugged me every night. I need to understand that before I walk away." Jennifer shook her head. "What if it's worse than you think? What if he—" She stopped, catching herself, unwilling to say it aloud. "You're playing a dangerous game." Mira met her gaze. "No, I'm surviving it." That night, Mira sat at her vanity table with the camera on. Her phone was propped against a stack of books, its screen glowing as it recorded. Her face looked neutral on camera, but her eyes held something new. Not fear. Not yet strength. Something in between. She spoke directly, voice low. "This is day 1. I haven't taken the pill. I feel clear. I don't know how long I'll be able to do this before he notices, but I'm documenting everything. For the record, in case something happens." She clicked stop and saved the video to a hidden folder. Each night after that, she recorded another. Her voice became sharper, her updates more detailed. She described John's behavior, the way he moved through the house, his comments, his habits. She filmed herself placing the pill into a napkin. She filmed the jar growing heavier with the saved tablets. Every day she left a trail, and John, unaware of it all, had started smiling more. Dinner became a performance. He laughed at her jokes again. He asked about her day, complimented her cooking, even touched her hand as they ate. "You seem better lately," he said one night, his eyes bright. "The pills must finally be kicking in. I knew they'd help." "If you just trusted me," Mira smiled back gently, "maybe you were right." He chuckled, reached for more curry, and looked like a man satisfied with how his life was quietly unfolding. He never noticed that her tea was untouched until after he finished his own. It took her days to build the moment. She'd switched the bottles just as he taught her to trust the drug. She chose a night when he was more relaxed than usual, when his laughter came easily and his focus was off. As she brought the tray into the dining room, she made sure both cups looked identical. Same color, same amount of sugar. But only one was different now. The crushed pill, taken from the same bottle he'd used on her, dissolved perfectly into the darker cup. He thanked her as he always did, a brief, dismissive "good" when she asked if the food was to his liking. She sat across from him, picking at her plate, watching his fingers curl around the cup. He drank slowly, making small sounds of contentment between sips. "This is nice," he said. "We don't do this enough anymore. Just talk." Mira nodded, folding her hands on the table. "I've missed it." They sat in quiet for a while after dinner, the remnants of the meal between them, the evening. A calm. He stretched his arms and leaned back, his gaze unfocused for a moment. Mira watched him closely, noting every blink, every shift in tone. He didn't notice her barely touching her tea. He stood, walked to the living room, then returned minutes later to ask what they'd just been talking about. Mira tilted her head. "You said you missed this. Talking." He blinked, puzzled. "Did I?" She just smiled and began clearing the table. Later that night, with the lights dimmed and the dishes washed, she returned to the kitchen and pulled out the small jar once again. She added another pill to it. Then she walked to the mirror, picked up her phone and started recording. "Tonight I switched the cup. He drank what I've been drinking for weeks. He doesn't know yet, but when he asked what we were talking about just minutes ago, he didn't remember." She exhaled, long and slow, and stared at her own reflection. "I don't know how far I'll go with this, but I know now. I'm not crazy. He really was doing this to me." The next morning, she stood beside the kettle again, watching the water boil. She could hear John in the shower, humming a tune he probably didn't know the words to. Everything about the house felt normal, but nothing was. The pieces had shifted. The balance was tilting. She poured the tea, stirred the cups gently, and walked back into the dining room with both mugs. She set his down in front of him and sat across the table again. He looked up with a grin, warm and smug. "I slept like a baby," he said, yawning. "Whatever's in that stuff, it's gold." Mira smiled, picked up her own cup and held it lightly in her hand. She watched him drink without suspicion, without hesitation. And as he swallowed, she leaned forward just slightly and whispered, "Let's see what you forget tonight." John had always prided himself on control, over the house, over Mira, over every carefully planned moment of his quiet domestic life. But lately, Mira noticed subtle cracks forming. He started pausing mid-sentence, struggling for simple words. He would walk into a room and forget why. Once she found him standing in the hallway, blankly staring at a wall, his brows furrowed as if searching his own memory for instructions. When she asked what he was doing, he blinked, confused, then forced a laugh. "Just thinking," he said, waving it off. But Mira saw the panic flicker in his eyes before he turned away. He complained of headaches more frequently, claimed the lights were too bright, the sounds too sharp. He asked Mira if she had changed the seasoning in his food. "It tasted different," he said, but the food hadn't changed, only he had. Each time he rubbed his temples or stood with a dazed expression, Mira would offer him water, keep her voice soft, her eyes kind. But inside she watched everything with surgical precision. She made mental notes of each lapse, each slurred sentence, each missed beat of the routine he used to enforce so strictly. One evening, as he sat on the sofa flipping through channels, he muttered something under his breath, something Mira almost missed. "I had the strangest dream last night," he said, rubbing his forehead. "You were yelling, crying, said I locked you in. You were hitting the door." Mira's spine stiffened. She kept her hands steady as she folded laundry on the table. Behind him, "What do you think it meant?" he shrugged. "I don't know, felt real." He chuckled, but it was hollow. "Must be the stress. Work's been fogging me up lately." She didn't respond, and he turned back to the screen. But Mira knew exactly what he was describing. It wasn't a dream. It was a night from 3 weeks ago, when she had faked a panic attack, screaming through the hallway just to see how he would react. He had stood there cold, telling her to go lie down, reminding her to take her pill, his tone bored. She had recorded the entire thing, and now he remembered it not as fact, but as fiction, a dream. That was how it began, confusion swallowing reality, just as he'd done to her. A few nights later, he wandered into the kitchen at midnight, eyes glazed, asking if it was time for dinner. Mira stood still, watching him walk straight to the empty table. "You already ate," she said gently. He looked around, then down at his hands. "Did I?" he murmured. "I swear I—" "Never mind." He shuffled back to the bedroom like a ghost. That same week, he forgot his own sister's birthday. He'd reminded Mira 3 times about it earlier in the month, even asked her to order a gift, but the day came and went, and when she brought up the package, he stared at her blankly. "What gift?" he asked. "Whose birthday?" He became more irritable. His temper flared at small things. He knocked over his tea one morning and screamed at the cup like it had betrayed him. Mira said nothing. She cleaned the mess, gave him a fresh cup, and watched as he took it with shaking hands. The unraveling was steady, quiet, terrifying. One night, after pacing around the house restlessly for hours, John collapsed onto the couch and sat with his head in his hands. Mira stayed nearby, folding towels in the corner. He didn't know she was watching. "I think I'm losing my mind," he said into his palms. "I keep seeing her." Mira didn't move. "Who?" He looked up slowly. His eyes were rimmed with red. "My first wife." The words hung between them like fog. "I keep dreaming about her. She's angry. Keeps asking me questions, keeps staring at me like she knows what I did." His voice was barely above a whisper. Mira walked over quietly, placed a hand on the armrest near him, but didn't touch him. "You never talk about her," he rubbed his eyes. "There wasn't much to say. She left. Are you sure?" He looked at her, his face pale. She was too curious, always asking things, snooping, couldn't let it go. He trailed off, his mouth twitching into something between a smirk and a grimace. People like that, they don't stop until you make them. Mira's stomach turned, but she kept her face still. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she simply nodded, stepping back to the sink as if the conversation hadn't just shifted her entire understanding of who she was living with. Later, that night, when John finally dozed off, his snores shallow, breath uneven, Mira slipped out of bed and walked to the wardrobe. There was a drawer he never let her open. She'd seen him lock it, though she never saw him take out the key. Over. The past week, she had searched his pants, his shoes, his coat pockets, and the day before, she had found it tucked into an old cigarette box in the back of his closet. She inserted the key into the lock, her fingers trembling only slightly. It clicked open with ease. Inside was a black box, small, dusty, unassuming. She pulled it out slowly, set it on the bed, and opened the lid. The first thing she saw was a photograph. A woman, young, bright-eyed, smiling beside John. The same man, just younger. The next photo showed the same woman, but this time her face looked wary, her smile forced. Mira picked up the ID card beside it. The name was unfamiliar, but the face was unmistakable. The same woman. She shuffled through more papers, letters, notes. One was a hospital bill. Another was an old missing persons flyer, faded and crumpled at the edges. Mira's hand froze. The woman hadn't left. She had disappeared. Mira closed the box carefully, as though even sound could wake something too dangerous to face unprepared. She returned it to the drawer, relocked it, and placed the key back exactly where she'd found it. She sat at the edge of the bed in the dark, eyes wide open, listening to the shallow breath beside her. She had all the proof she needed. But what? She now understood was far more dangerous than anything she'd imagined. He hadn't just drugged her, he had done this before, and the last woman who got too curious never got the chance to tell anyone. Mira started waking up earlier than usual, long before John stirred. While the sky was still dark and the house silent, she would open her laptop, plug in her USB, and begin sorting through files. Every clip, every entry, every screenshot was renamed and organized with dates and timestamps. She uploaded duplicates to an encrypted drive and sent copies to an email address she'd created under a different name. She printed documents in batches, tucking them between pages of recipe books and stacking them in old shoeboxes in the storage room. No motion was wasted, no move impulsive. Every action was calculated, measured, deliberate. She updated her video diary too, her voice lower now, her words sharper. The dreams he's having are worse. He talks in his sleep. He mentioned her again, the first wife. I don't think she ever left. I think he made her disappear. Then she would pause, let the silence sit for a beat before ending the recording and labeling the file with the same cold clarity that had started to settle over her thoughts. During the day, she was flawless. She smiled at John when he complained about his headaches. She fetched him water when he snapped over a missing sock. When he asked where she'd been for 20 minutes, she offered soft answers. Just organizing the cupboard, just cleaning the mirror, just making tea. Her tone never shifted. Her hands never shook. If he studied her, he saw nothing but the wife he had crafted, obedient, quiet, consistent. But Mira could see the change in him. His control was slipping. He'd forget where he put his keys, then accuse her of moving them. He'd ask her why the mail hadn't been checked, even after she'd handed it to him hours earlier. His frustration swelled at strange intervals. "Are you hiding something from me?" he asked one night, voice flat, but eyes burning. Mira blinked slowly and tilted her head. "Like what?" she asked calmly. He stared at her for a moment, then walked away, muttering something under his breath. She started keeping her phone on silent, charging it in the bathroom, hidden behind a towel rack. She stopped using the home Wi-Fi instead. Using borrowed data packages on a prepaid SIM, she hid inside a tampon box. She checked the locks on the window each night and memorized the sound of every creak in the hallway. She noticed how long it took him to fall asleep, how deeply he slept, how long she had between the moment his breathing settled and the moment it turned restless again. One night, while he lay snoring beside her, Mira rose quietly and pulled the shoebox from beneath the bed. Inside were copies of every document she had found in his drawer, the missing woman's ID, the photos, the medical notes, the flyer. She added one more, an envelope containing the most recent footage of him dazed, mumbling about making people disappear. She sealed it, labeled it with her name, and set it beside the door tucked behind the shoe rack. John's behavior turned erratic in the mornings. He would forget they had tea the night before, forget where he left his phone. He asked Mira if they had dinner. When she told him what they ate, he called her a liar. "You're trying to confuse me," he snapped. "You think I don't see it?" She didn't flinch. "Do you want me to call someone? Maybe you need to rest." His paranoia swelled with each passing day. He began checking the front door twice before bed. He locked the windows, even in daylight. He checked her phone when she left it unattended, once even following her to the bathroom, standing outside while she brushed her teeth. "I know you're hiding something," he whispered one night, eyes red, jaw clenched. Mira placed a hand on his shoulder gently. "I'm right here. I haven't gone anywhere." But she had. In her mind, in her plans, she had gone far, far away from him already. Jennifer called from a blocked number. They kept it brief, coded. "The package is ready," she said, "just waiting on the pickup." Mira smiled faintly. "Tomorrow morning. It'll be on the doorstep." That night she didn't sleep. She sat beside the window, listening to the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of electricity in the walls. She watched the sky change color slowly, from indigo to gray. She made breakfast like usual, eggs, toast, slightly burnt edges the way he liked. She placed the tea on the table and kissed his forehead before telling him she needed to get the laundry from the back porch. He nodded, distracted, and then came the knock, firm, 3 times, not hurried, not aggressive, just official. Mira froze for half a second, her hand tightening slightly on the edge of the table. then released it. She walked to the door with calm steps. Her eyes flicked once to the envelope beside the shoe rack. She bent down, picked it up and opened the door. Two officers stood there, one with a clipboard, the other with a small badge already raised. Mrs. Mira Merlin. She nodded once. Yes, the officer gave her a kind, practiced look. We'd like to speak with you. May we come in? She stepped aside and let them enter, her voice steady as ever. He's in the kitchen. Behind her, John's voice called out, confused. Who's there? Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to anymore. The officers moved quickly once Mira led them inside. One remained with her, while the other stepped into the kitchen where John stood with a piece of toast in hand, blinking in confusion. He looked at the uniform, then at Mira, his brows furrowing. What's going on? He asked, voice sharp. The officer calmly explained they were there to ask questions regarding a missing persons case from several years ago. Mira didn't speak. She walked to the side table, opened a drawer, and handed over a thick envelope. Inside were printouts, photographs, the copy of the missing flyer, and a USB drive. The officers read in silence. John's voice grew louder. Mira! What is this? What the hell is this? He stepped forward, but the second officer intercepted him, hand gently on his shoulder, keeping space between them. Mira kept her gaze low, collected. She retrieved the jar of saved pills from behind the spice rack, placed it on the counter, then the notebook, then the second USB, marked clearly with the date of each recording. John's voice cracked. You're setting me up. You've lost your mind. One of the officers asked him to calm down, but he didn't. He ranted, pacing, asking Mira why she was doing this. What did I ever do to you? He yelled, eyes wild. She met his eyes for the first time in weeks. You drugged me, night after night, he stuttered. It was just to help you sleep. You were always so... You did the same to your first wife. Silence snapped across the room like glass breaking. One of the officers turned toward her. You have her information. Mira nodded and handed over the folder from the locked drawer. John's face paled. His arms dropped to his sides. The defiance slipped into panic. That was years ago. She left. She just left. You don't know anything. They didn't argue with him. They didn't need to. The evidence Mira provided was enough to trigger an official investigation. His fingerprints on the documents, his voice in the videos, the hospital bills, the sedatives, and the look in his eyes, the realization that whatever control he thought he had, whatever silence he had once counted on, had finally cracked open wide. As they placed the cuffs on his wrists, John turned to Mira with stunned disbelief, as if only now beginning to understand that the woman who stood before him was not the same one he had numbed and silenced for so long. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply watched him being led out the door. She didn't look back once. Months passed. The air in Mira's new world was lighter. The shelter was small but warm, filled with soft voices and quiet strength. Women came in with their own stories. Some whispered, some shouted. Mira listened. She filed papers, ran workshops on self-protection, helped with resumes and late-night tea. She no longer carried the weight of drowsiness in her limbs. She no longer reached for a pill bottle before bed. Her sleep came naturally now, deep, dreamless, safe. The staff respected her. Some knew parts of her story, but she never gave them all of it. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. She moved through the space with gentle authority, offering others the calm she had fought so hard to reclaim. The nightmares had faded. The fear had softened. She was no longer the shadow of someone she used to be. One afternoon, Jennifer appeared at the shelter, holding a small bouquet of fresh lilies. Mira was sorting supplies when she looked up and smiled genuinely. The kind of smile that didn't feel like performance anymore. They embraced quietly. Thought you could use something beautiful in your office, Jennifer said, setting the flowers down beside a stack of folders. Mira poured tea for them both, the scent of cardamom rising gently between them. They sat across from each other in two mismatched chairs, the kind found in old donation bins but made softer by the room's light. Jennifer glanced around and nodded approvingly. "You did it," she said. Mira stirred her tea. "I'm still doing it." They talked for a while, light conversation, the easy rhythm of old friends who had passed through fire together. At one point, Jennifer grew quiet and said, "They found more. Files, a safety deposit box he had under another name. They think he may have done it to others." Mira nodded slowly. "I'm not surprised." Jennifer reached across and touched her hand. "You saved yourself." Mira's eyes softened. "I remembered myself." Outside the window, the afternoon sun cast soft shapes against the wall. Children laughed in the background. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was crying, and another was helping her breathe through it. Mira looked out toward the garden, where a young girl was hanging clothes on a line, her arms moving in slow, peaceful rhythm. She watched for a moment longer before turning back to Jennifer with a small, certain smile. "He tried to erase me," she said gently, "but I remembered everything." If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more true-to-life, emotional stories that show how courage can rewrite any ending.